Okay. Okay, welcome to the second seminar of 2024. We're really happy that Rania is here to present religious safety nets and their effects on human capital accumulation. Thank you so much, Rania, to for agreeing to present. Just to say the usual things, please mute your microphones, of course, except Rania, during the presentation. And Rania, you're happy to take questions during your...
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to just interject like a normal, seminar, as if we're all in the same room. That's no issue.
Please unmute if you have any questions. Of course, you can put it in the chat as well. And I assume, Klaus, it's going to be, well, you started the recording anyway, so it will be available on the website. So over to you, Rania. Thank you.
So thank you for having me, and I appreciate that. So as you said, the topic is on religious safety nets and their effects on human capital accumulation. It is a joint project with a bunch of Israelis. So Naomi and Asaf are from Ben Gurion University. Hani is from the University of Colorado, and Yanai is from Bar Ilan University. So a bit of a motivation for this paper. Public education is one of the most important, yet just let me move this up here. Sorry. Yeah. So one of the most important yet contentious goods provided by the state. It's considered a tool for nation building because in addition to imparting knowledge, public education is also a vehicle for transmitting cultural as well as political values. In the US, debate over, actually globally a little bit, debates over school curriculum oversight, parental rights, and funding for alternative school have intensified lately. The debate often revolves around the role of religious private schools and whether they should be receiving public funding, yes or not, about their curriculums and their oversight. In the US, a recent Supreme Court decision barred the state of Montana from excluding religious schools from its private school scholarship program without even subjecting the schools for regulation. So it's a bit of a hot topic, so to speak. I'm going to give a bit of background in a nutshell about religious schools and politics in Israel, which is where we're focused on. So ultra-Orthodox Jews are communities within Judaism that strictly adhere to Jewish laws and tradition and typically reject modern values. As of now, they constitute around 13% of the population in Israel. They have high fertility rates. We'll see those later. Low male employment, low labor force attachment, and a strong mutual insurance system. They are represented, politically speaking, by two main parties in the parliament, broadly representing the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic communities, but their voter base extends beyond their community members. Affiliate organizations of these parties operate independent schooling systems funded by the government. So within the ultra-Orthodox, there are multiple subdivisions, and each division or each subdivision is considered practically an independent community, and they tend to run their own school stream. However, they are subject to minimal, if at all, oversight over their curriculum. Ultra-Orthodox schools receive also higher funding per student and provide in-kind amenities that are not available in other public schools, and they are available only to those who are attending ultra-Orthodox schools. They focus primarily on the study of the Jewish religion at the expense of what we're calling secular subjects, such as English, math, or science. The schooling system had practically exploded over the last 3 to 4 decades. As of today, about 25% of the Jewish first graders currently attend an ultra-Orthodox school. So our research questions are the following. We use a reform in Israel's child allowance program, which reduced unconditional cash benefits to large families, to answer the following questions. So we're basically interested in understanding the multiple roles that public funding to ultra-Orthodox schools can play. The first one, do religious schools function as an alternative social safety net to the state? Then we move to understanding the short as well as the long-run effects of reducing cash transfers in the presence of competing institutions. We're going to be thinking about how do parents adjust, or do they rather adjust their fertility rates as well as the labor force participation due to this reduction in cash transfers? What are the implications on the children's human capital accumulation, both in the short as well as the long run? And do these effects vary across children? Specifically, we're going to be looking at different age of exposure within the same family. What are the long-term human capital, fertility, and labor market outcomes of these children? Here, we're not going to be showing these results yet, as we are in the process of getting this data. But obviously, given the circumstances, we've had a couple of delays. And then we'll be also looking at what are the implications on voting and social polarization.
Ira here, when you say
Yes.
Human capital here, do you mean secular human capital, religious human capital, or a combination of the two?
We'll be touching more on the secular human capital. I assume by secular human capital, you mean education, like the formal education. That's what we'll be looking at. So for example, we'll be looking at their high school matriculation rates and the quality of their high school diploma, which is the Bagrut in Israel, which is equivalent to the baccalaureate in Europe, for example.
Yeah, that's what I was just wondering, because you said that the ultra-Orthodox, a lot of their education is in religious studies to the detriment of secular studies. So they're in school.
They're in school.
But
However,
the
curriculum is completely different when we compare the public school curriculum versus those religious schools, because basically, as I said, there is very little oversight and there is a lot of emphasis on teaching religion, especially for boys. And I'm going to be getting to that. We're going to find heterogeneity, boys versus girls.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Okay, so in terms of contribution, we contribute to sort of multiple literatures. The first one being we contribute to the literature on the political economy of religious institutions and how they compete with the state welfare system. So there are a bunch of papers that have shown evidence for the substitution between state funds and what we're calling religious safety nets, how certain amenities given by religious schools or religious institutions can substitute for safety nets coming from the states. However, most of these papers have focused on looking at the consequences of this mechanism on practicing religions or attending services or charity donations. What we will be focusing on instead, and this is where our contribution is we're trying to look at estimating the long-term human capital, demographic, as well as cultural effects of reducing, and again, emphasis on unconditional cash benefits that parents are given and children in the presence of competing institutions. And those institutions, in our case, are going to be the religious schools. We also contribute to the literature on the short as well as the long-term effects of unconditional cash transfers. So here there is a flute of papers that have looked at child allowances in general, but these have been unable to isolate the income effect from the price effect. And typically these are transitory transfers that are given as a one-time transfer. Instead, we are looking at a very specific type of transfer that is given from birth up to age 18, which is when the child ages out of the system. We're also going to be showing that a parental investment in children is going to vary by age of exposure, even when, unlike the two papers by Sean Steinberg as well as Carrillo, even when the opportunity cost of attending school does not change. Okay. A quick preview of results. The reform increased the probability that Jewish boys are ever enrolled in an ultra-Orthodox schools, and the effects are driven by boys aged 5 to 12 in 2003, which is when we have a change in policy. The decline in cash transfers lowered the probability of matriculating high school and the quality of the high school diploma for Jewish boys specifically. And the results are again largest for children aged 5 to 12 in the time of the change of policy. We see no change in long-term educational attainment of Jewish girls or Arab children. There is no evidence that the decline in cash benefits reduced completed fertility of Jewish families or increased the labor supply of parents. However, the reform did reduce the completed fertility for Arab families, as well as we find evidence that it increased the labor supply for fathers. A bit more of a background on ultra-Orthodox schools. So the public, I see Elena raised the hand. There's a question. Yes.
Yes, I was just wondering, do you find that as a result of the reform, you see all these people now becoming ultra-Orthodox in order to go to these schools for free? And is this a concern when it comes, you know?
So it is a concern. I'm going to show you what we find, but what we're finding is that basically families that are typically on the margin, which means families who have never sent any of their other kids to ultra-Orthodox schools, this policy is going to push them to send some of their kids to ultra-Orthodox schools. And the long-term effect I was talking about is actually looking at whether those children have a higher likelihood eventually of attending a seminary, which is the yeshiva, when they get to age. So it's still on the margin because those kids are just now being in their 20s. We're getting that data, but that's obviously our concern. So the public K to 12 education system in Israel can be basically categorized into 4 streams. We have the Jewish secular, the Jewish religious, the independent ultra-Orthodox, as well as the Arab secular. From 2000 to 2014, the number of first grade students in ultra-Orthodox schools grew by 67%, whereas the number of students in the rest of the Jewish sector grew only by 20%. So it is sort of a concern, Elena. All students matriculate high school by taking a centrally administered exams and are subject to the same requirements to earn the Bagrut, which is the diploma for high school matriculation, similar to the baccalaureate in Europe or to any other high school graduation diplomas. Earning a Bagrut diploma is an important requirement for any entry jobs and post-secondary schooling. 3% only of ultra-Orthodox boys and 20% of ultra-Orthodox girls were eligible to receive a high school diploma in 2016-2017. The return for religious education are higher for boys because they can join a religious seminary, which is the yeshiva, and receive stipends. So whereas it is typical that actually women within the ultra-Orthodox community work outside the household for paid work. So their labor force attachment tend to typically be much higher than the labor force attachment of ultra-Orthodox men. About 10% of families mix type of schools, so they tend to send some of their kids to ultra-Orthodox schools versus not, and sometimes they reshuffle. 3% of children move in and out of the ultra-Orthodox system every year. So there is movement. The Ministry of Education funding for ultra-Orthodox schools followed the same formula as other public schools, which depends on the number of classrooms in the school, as well as the social-economic status of the students. On average, ultra-Orthodox schools have more classrooms per school and lower ranked socio-economic status of their students, which, given that institutional setting, that increases the funding per student. Unlike non-ultra-Orthodox schools that receive their budgets in the form of teaching hours, meaning the Ministry of Education pays the teachers directly for their teaching hours, ultra-Orthodox schools receive direct transfers, which they can spend without any oversight. While ultra-Orthodox schools commit to dedicate certain hours to certain topics, in practice, there is little supervision on their curriculum, and the quality of their the secular education they provide is fairly low. Ultra-Orthodox schools also receive additional funding that is typically negotiated through government coalition agreements. So the way it works is that typically, or rather very much so in the past 2 to 3 decades, whoever needs to form a coalition to form a government in Israel typically needs the ultra-Orthodox parties in order to be able to form a strong enough government to form a coalition. And these parties typically negotiate very fiercely for funding for their schools and funding in general for their streams. These differences in how ultra-Orthodox schools are funded enable them to provide amenities that are not available in non-ultra-Orthodox schools. These include longer school days, free lunches, transportation, subsidized after-school care, as well as subsidized boarding high schools.
Rania, how do they manage to have no oversight? I mean, how are they different from, let's say, regular schools, and especially if it's religion playing a part, then there are, you said, Jewish religious schools as well. Why ultra-Orthodox are different from the others?
That is a good question. There's been a lot of talking and a lot of reports on this matter, but I think it's part of what negotiations to enter the coalition are for. This is why they are run independently. And I think the idea is that there is some oversight because they commit to teach certain topics, but then the oversight tends to be very minimal if present at all. There's been a lot of talking. This is a good question, but this is part of the things that they negotiate for, this independence.
So you might have mentioned before, but when did this increase kind of, substantial increase happen, kind of in terms of how many, how many years has it been?
For what? For the increase in the schools in
In the
general?
ultra-Orthodox,
So it's been happening in the past 2 to 3 decades, quite extensively.
right.
So because they tend to, or at least they've been trying to attract to their schools, not only ultra-Orthodox families per se, but they try to attract also people who are rather on the margin as well, given the amenities that they can provide.
But it has obviously a strong implication in terms of the human capital that is, so the last 2-3 decades means quite a lot of, sort of reduction, if you like, in overall stock of human capital, which should worry, I mean, the new parents, but also the government. And it's quite surprising. Anyway, I mean, I know
it is surprising. That's absolutely a concern. So this is what, at the conclusion, I'm going to touch on it. So this trend basically means that there are more people relying on government programs, obviously because of their low labor force attachment. And the concern is also on tensions within the society as well.
Okay.
Because there are tensions across these different subpopulations.
Okay, thank you. I think Fani has his hand up.
Yes.
Fani?
I just have a quick question. So as far as you showed those 4 different school categories, and maybe I missed. So how are the graduation rates across these 4 schools? I mean, is one of them more than the other, or?
Yes, there is variation, and this is some of the data that we're trying to get. We're trying to understand where most of the, in our case, the lower, the higher dropout rates or lack of matriculation is coming from. But I would think that most of it is coming from the independent ultra-Orthodox schools. Because of the independence, because there is little oversight and little oversight on student performance, on student curriculum, and how they spend their budget.
But as far as the exams, whatever that standardized exam is the same exam.
The exams are standardized, yes, just like we all know. It's high school exams that are typically run by the Ministry of Education, and anyone who wants a matriculation diploma needs to pass these exams.
So, but it's conceivable that some of the schools get better coaching so that they can do better on the test?
Well, there is, as I said at the beginning, there are within the ultra-Orthodox, there are multiple streams. These multiple sects or streams, they are independent communities, and they vary by how conservative they are. And I believe that they vary also by what's the curriculum in their school looks like. Okay. They also vary by the curriculum for boys versus the curriculum for girls as well. So there is that variation as well. Why? Because of the different returns that the boy can get from religious education versus what is expected from the girl in that population.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay, Israel Child's Allowance Program. So every child in Israel at birth is entitled to receive a non-taxable monthly allowance up to the age of 18, which is when they age out of this program. Currently, the allowance is set to be 156 new Israeli shekels per child, which is about $600 per year. And if you look at the entire stream of this allowance, it's roughly $11,000 by the age of 18. The child allowance is unconditional and is typically transferred to the mother. Let's look at the reform that we're going to be exploiting. So until 2003, the allowance increased non-linearly with birth order for families with 3 or more children. So up to if you have 3 children, the allowance per child was more or less the same. Starting from whether you have a 4th, then a 5th, then a 6th child, the allowance has increased exponentially. So for example, in 2001, the monthly allowance for the 1st and 2nd child was 230 roughly new Israeli shekels. However, the allowance for the 3rd child jumped for 400 to 456 new Israeli shekels, which means doubled in terms of dollars. As you can see, we went from $76 to $156. And then for the 4th child, it goes to $310 roughly. So there is here sort of a mechanism that, if you want, encourages bigger families. So again, this is part of what these parties negotiate for when they join the coalition. The structure and generosity of this reform were influenced by ultra-Orthodox parties who represent a population with high fertility rates. We're talking about over 7 on average in 2003, and in 2021, it was about 6.6 on average for an ultra-Orthodox family. In 2003, a new government was formed, and that government did not rely on the votes of ultra-Orthodox parties. So that government did not need any of the ultra-Orthodox parties in order to form the coalition. They announced their intentions to linearize the payment schedule, which means not have these exponential schedule, but for each kid, whether it's the 1st, whether it's the 5th, you would receive the same allowance. The details of the so-called Netanyahu reform were announced on April 29, 2003. It was voted into law on May 29, 2003. The linearization of the schedule reduced the monthly allowance for a 3rd or higher order child born after June 1st relative to a child with the same birth order who was born right before this date. So here you can see, you can get a hint of how the allowance changed. So we see here 2001, 2002, you can see clearly, I gave the example of 2001, that 1st and 2nd child, the allowance is the same. The 3rd, there's a jump. The 4th, there is an extreme jump, and 5 plus, you have practically an allowance that is 5-fold compared to the 1st child. In 2003, that policy was announced, and if you were born after June 1st, 2003, you would be looking at this schedule of allowance. If you were born before, the same sort of exponential schedule would be followed. And then after that, there's been some changes, some adjustments, but you can clearly see that the attempt was to keep the schedule linearized for those who were born after June 1st, 2003. Okay, now here we have 2 simulations that are meant to show that for any type of family, the cost of having a 5th child after this policy was passed was the same across our treated families versus our controlled families. Basically, whether their fourth child was born after June 1st, 2003, versus whether their fourth child was born before June 1st, 2003. So on the left, we have a simulation of two families. Both families have had their child in 2003. However, one family had their fourth child before June 1st, 2003, and the other family had their fourth after the cutoff. You can see the schedule here, how much allowance they get, and we're representing the difference that these families see in terms of the allowance. The orange lines represents the aging out of the system of the other siblings of those families. As you can see, the accumulated difference across these two families because of the policy is basically 27,300 new Israeli shekels, which amounts to roughly about $6,000. Okay, up to from 2003 up to 2018. Now, this other type of family had a fifth child born in 2006. However, as we can see, the gap in the allowance is the same like the gap for these two families who did not have an extra child after 2003, which means they didn't go from having 4 children to having 5 children. You can see that the accumulated difference in terms of allowances is again exactly the same. Again, what we're trying to get out of these two simulations is that the cost of having a fifth child for these two types of families is exactly the same. Hence, we're identifying an income effect and not a substitution slash a price effect. Yes, I see a hand raised.
Rania, on my side,
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Rania, I was going to ask whether this child allowance is adjusted for changes in cost of living or inflation over time.
It tends to be adjusted to inflation, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And we're looking at, that's why we've adjusted to 2021 new Israeli shekels. So this is all, this is a real gap.
and it probably doesn't make any difference, but just to clarify, I mean, you said family, so it has to be the same couple and their children. I mean, like a man or a woman has children from other, sort of previous marriage, then that's not, so one mother has 7 children, but they are not from the same.
No, it's in the ultra, we're talking here about high fertility families. It is from the same mother.
So the mother is the common denominator here.
The mother is the common denominator because in Judaism, everything is related for the mother in the sense,
Right,
this
okay.
is how you know really who the mother is, but the dad is always questionable if you want.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
in any case, this is why the allowance goes straight to the mother's bank account. That's the default.
But a mother, I mean, it doesn't again make any difference. Mother could be married, have 2 children from one person, then get divorced and have 5 children for another person.
But it's unlikely in these high fertility
Okay.
families
Yeah,
that
so
we're
this
looking at,
is
because we're
yeah.
going to be focusing, given that the allowance has affected only high fertility families, meaning those with 4+, and this is the subpopulation we're focusing on, these tend to be very conservative families.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's
Thank you.
okay, no problem. Okay, our identification strategy is a regression discontinuity design, and RDD. What we do is we compare the outcomes of families with the same number as well as age composition of children whose 4th or higher birth order child was born either before or after after the June 1st cutoff. So if you want, these families are identical, except that their fourth child for one family was born after the cutoff, for one family was born right before the cutoff. This estimates, as I mentioned, the income effect of reducing the child allowance, holding the price of an additional future child constant, as we've seen in those simulation, whether these two families are going to have a fifth child, they are going to see the same allowance schedule for their fifth child. However, only for their fourth order child will they see a different allowance schedule. The main assumption is that children born before or after June 1st, 2003 are randomly assigned. We obviously check for all the balances. So the policy was announced shortly before implementation. There is no evidence of discontinuities in birth around the cutoff. For the interest of time, I'm not going to show that. You'll have to trust me. No difference in the observed characteristics between treated and controlled children. So again, treated children are those born after the cutoff, and the control are those born before. Other welfare reform should have the same effect across the June 1st, 2003 cutoff. The empirical model, so this is the regression that we estimate. We have an outcome H. So let's think about whether you were ever enrolled in an ultra-Orthodox school. That's going to be one of the first outcomes we're going to be looking at. We have DH is going to be the indicator equal to 1 if a child in household H was born on or after June 1st, 2003. Our running variable is going to be a linear function of the number of days. It's allowed to vary across the cutoff. So this is a typical RDD. XH is going to be a vector of household and parental controls. It includes also the age structure of sibling at birth, twin birth, sex, the locality's socioeconomic status, as well as a district fixed effect. We also use an arbitrary bandwidth of 10 weeks, 70 days around the cutoff, but we check for robustness for other bandwidth selectors, and our results are robust to these different bandwidths. Our data represents the universe of households with birth during 2003. We get that from the population registry panel for the years 2002 up to 2018. It includes information on ethnicity and children's exact date of birth. So we have the date of birth of the entire family, meaning this is how we have the age composition of all the other siblings, because it's important to control what are the age gaps within the family, because that's going to affect the schedule allowance, because when one sibling ages out of the system, the birth order is reinitiated. Parents' tax records from the Israel Tax Authority for 1998 to 2018. We have the number of a month in which they were employed, and we have the labor earnings. This is to look for whether there is any adjustment on the labor force participation. We also merge this data to data from the Ministry of Education on the type of school children are enrolled in over time, non-ultra-Orthodox versus ultra-Orthodox, whether a Bagrut was earned, which is the matriculation diploma, as well as the quality of the diploma. So we have the number of credits taken in different topics. Our main sample, as I've already mentioned, is going to be families who had 4 or more children in 2003. Why? Because these are the families that are mostly affected by the linearization. All right, so here, for us to get a better sense of how to interpret this decline in allowance, what we have here is sort of a first stage for the decline. So what we have here is in dollars, the cash transfer per child. So the stream of cash transfers per child within a household up to age 18. And what you can see is clearly that at the cutoff of the June 1st, so here each dot is weekly bins, you can see the drop at that cutoff. It's a very sharp drop. And it amounts to, per child, we're talking about roughly a 1,700 US dollars. But again, this is per child. So if we take into account the fact that we're talking about families, that in our data, the average fertility is around the 5.7, that means that these families are exposed to a drop in allowance of roughly 32,000 new Israeli shekels, which is roughly $9,000. And the way to think about it is that we're talking about a reduction that is gonna happen over 10 to 11 years, because this is how long, given the family composition, it takes for that child to age out of the system. So we're talking roughly about the $72 per month for about 11 years. So this is just to get the concept of how much are we talking about.
Rania, just a quick question. Why there's a trend before the cutoff? Why there's trend? It's the allowance per child is a fixed number. When they change it, they change it. Why it should be trendy?
Because things did change a bit over the years. So every time there's a new government, the allowance schedule changes a little bit. But the biggest change was in 2003.
I see.
Okay.
So it changes in laws, not averages are calculated in this.
Yes, it changes quite a bit.
And I had an earlier question which I did not ask. Did you have access to this tax record? Access to these?
We have access to Mas Akhnasa records. Yes.
Okay, so I will be in touch with you
Yes.
soon about this.
Okay.
Thank
No
you.
problem.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So here I'm showing short-term adjustments among Jewish families. So what do we have here? Here we're looking at the effects of reducing those cash benefits on enrollment in religious schools for Jewish families. So in panel A, we're looking at children who were age 0 to 4 at the time in June 2003. So again, remember that we have information about all the siblings in the household. And as you can see, whether we're looking at boys or whether we're looking at girls, we see practically no effect of moving these children to different tracks, meaning moving them from a non-Orthodox to an Orthodox ultra-Orthodox school. Now, this is reasonable because these kids at the time of the, if you want, income shock, were not even in elementary school. So there was no need to sort of move them. However, when we look at children who were 5 to 12 at the time of the shock, we clearly see that there is a significant effect on whether they are moved to an ultra-Orthodox track. When we look at boys and their likelihood of enrolling in an ultra-Orthodox school in grades 1 to 8, which means elementary and middle school, for boys, we see an increase of a 4.1%, which compared to the mean, that would mean roughly about a 6%.
Was the shift into the Orthodox schools among particular subgroups of the population, like Russian immigrants, as opposed to other groups?
No, I don't think we can tell. If they are immigrants, we might be able to tell. But what we see is that these are families who were on the margin. We did not think about whether they are Russian immigrants or not. It might be worth to look at that. However, what we see is that those are sort of traditional families. They were on the margin, but then when this happened, they moved at least one or two of their children to our ultra-Orthodox school. That's what we're able to say as of this point. Because those who were ultra-Orthodox, you know, shock or no shock, their kids were already sort of enrolled in ultra-Orthodox school. So most of the action that we see is among these families who were before on the margin. So their kids were in public schools. They were not ultra-Orthodox. Okay, now if we look at boys, and so obviously the effect of enrolling them in elementary or middle school that are ultra-Orthodox is gonna be consistent over time and is gonna persist. So we see that for the same age group, the probability of being enrolled in an ultra-Orthodox high school is the likelihood is increased by 4.7, and that's about a 6% compared to the mean in the control group. Now, interestingly, when we look at girls, there we see lower increase, but the increase is not significant. Now, this is reasonable given that boys and girls have different returns for religious education, as I've mentioned earlier. Okay, we move now to looking at long-term effects on human capital accumulation, still looking at Jewish boys specifically, because we don't see much when it comes to girls. So when we look at whether they get a matriculation diploma, again in panel A, we have those who were less than 4 at the time of the income shock. We don't see much going on, consistent with what we've seen in the short term. However, again, for those who were aged 5 to 12 at the time of the shock, we see a clear reduction in the likelihood of getting a diploma. So we're talking about a reduction of 3.8% here, and compared to the mean in the control group, this is an 18% reduction in the likelihood of getting a high school diploma. This is very significant economically. We see that there are also effects on the quality of the diploma that they receive. I see a hand here.
Yeah, I just have a very quick
Yes.
question. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong screen, but anyway. So your outcome variable, I'm a little confused. How, when you talk about human capital accumulation, how is it measured?
So we look at human capital accumulation. First, our first outcome is whether you received a high school diploma. That's a type of human capital accumulation. Without a high school diploma, you practically can't get any entry job anywhere. So if we see a lower likelihood of getting a high school diploma, it means we have more Jewish boys within the population that did not even get a high school diploma. So clearly, there are going to be persistent effects on their ability to, even if they wanted down the road to join the labor force, that is going to be very hard. So these people are going to depend more on government program, or these people are going to be more likely, given their education, to join the yeshiva and receive stipends from the government.
Okay, good. Thank you.
No problem. All right. I see another hand. Amos. You're muted.
You-
You're still muted.
Sorry, was there any differences in cost among those two types of school that encourages like a movement from one to another? Another issue is having like 7 kids. This means the mother is engaged with children. They cannot generate income. And the fathers in these Orthodox families, usually they pray a lot. So where does the source of income come from?
So, as I said, typically mothers in ultra-Orthodox families, they do work. Their labor force participation is relatively high.
Okay.
If the dad is enrolled in a yeshiva, he's going to receive a stipend and other government benefits that amount to something substantial. And then in those streams, there are a lot of private funds that circulate. There is a
Okay,
lot
thank
of
you.
insurance from the community.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem.
Sorry, Rania, I should have warned you a bit earlier, but it's about 3 or 4 minutes.
Yeah. I'll have to rush. So, okay, let me just say, we find no evidence of change in religious school enrollment among families who we identify as ultra-Orthodox prior to the reform. I said that. No evidence of a decline in educational attainment among Jewish boys that were 13 to 17 at the time of the policy. For girls, we see nothing going on, as well as nothing going on for Arab children. Now, looking at fertility, let me just, we ask ourselves, did the decline in cash benefits change parental fertility and labor supply? Neoclassical models would say that this should reduce fertility and increase labor supply. Another way to think about it, one could offset the decline in income through in-kind transfers, and that might mute the income effect. Another way to think about it is an increase in religiosity might even increase fertility and lower labor force participation. Just to give you a picture of how sort of fertility looks like in the population. So in 2003, as you can see, the average fertility in the population was around 3. It dropped tremendously from earlier decades. Now, if I focus within the Jewish population, I just want to show you here that among the ultra-Orthodox, the fertility is very high. So in 2003, that was practically around the 7. And then in the next decade, it dropped slightly, but we're still around the 6 kids as of today. Here, I just want to show how the income shock did not affect the fertility among Jewish mothers, but it did affect completed fertility among Arab mothers. We can clearly see here a drop, which is roughly a drop of 10% in fertility rate for Arab mothers, whereas for Jewish mothers, we see no drop. And this is suggestive that to adjust for the income shock, those families relied on religious safety nets. One of the safety nets was those schools that provided extra amenities, which allowed those families to not consider any adjustment, not along the fertility and not along the labor force participation, which I might not have time to show. But the Arab families who don't have access to these safety nets have had to adjust. We see a drop in fertility rate, and we have evidence that the fathers here in this table, we have the number of months employed. We see an increase in the month employed, which amounts basically to an 8% increase in the month employed among Arab fathers. And this is the way that they've had to adjust, just like economic models would predict. However, again, among Jewish fathers or Jewish mothers, we see no significant effects. not on labor force participation, and not in terms of fertility. So additional, do I have time? How much time do I have? I think I'm practically done. Let me just talk about additional results really fast. We see no evidence that the decline in cash transfer impacted the fertility or labor supply of families who have had their first or second child in 2003. So that would be a placebo test. Smaller but statistically insignificant decline in the number of children for Jewish and Arab families who have had their third child in 2003. No effects on labor earnings for either population, and no evidence that the reform increased the probability that fathers join the yeshiva. Robustness checks. Let me just conclude or jump the conclusion and say where we're moving on next. We're going to be analyzing long-term effects on labor market, marriage, fertility, and yeshiva attendance of the treated children. So those children who move to ultra-Orthodox schools. And we're trying to better distinguish between different types of ultra-Orthodox schools. So as I've mentioned, the ultra-Orthodox community has subdivisions, and each subdivision is an independent community that runs its own school system. And we're trying to distinguish between these different school systems to see whether the effects we're getting are coming from one specific stream versus others. And thank you for being here. Thank you for your questions. I think I have to conclude, otherwise Matlub might be upset.
Thank you very much, Rania. Any questions? We have time for a couple of quick ones.
Okay, I just have one more quick question, because so when they try to linearize these benefits, whatever they were giving,
Yes.
was it like a big dogfight in the parliament? What do you call the Knesset, whatever, right? Is that the body where they do the legislation?
Well, I'm sure there were big fights because at that point, basically, the ultra-Orthodox parties were in the opposition. So I'm sure they showed their opposition, but it was a nail in the coffin somehow. Like, it was making a point of, negotiations with you are not needed anymore to form a coalition. And this is something that needs to be done, because it's clear that a lot of those families relied on those, exponential allowances. At the end, it amounts to, a pretty nice chunk at the end of the month. Not that they survived from it, but it's definitely, these families have low income and they relied a lot on these child allowances. They still do somehow, despite the linearization.
So this was not because of the budgetary reasons, right? It's not like they were spending a lot of money on this particular program, or
when it's budgetary reason not related to politics, so
boy, you're such a diplomat. All right, I got it wrong. Okay, folks, thanks so much. Thank you
for your questions.
Any other questions? Okay, then
I'm happy to stay here a few minutes and answer any questions anyone might have.
Okay, let me conclude officially the seminar, and then if somebody is around still. Thank you so much, Rania, for a very interesting presentation, very interesting paper. And as I said, the recording will be available on the GLO website. So until next week,
Thank you for having me.
Bye.